we should probably get started with the book of Job here. I believe we're up to session 5 now. And I think we got up through chapter 15 last time. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster today. For one thing, we have a time limit. We're after today, we have 3 sessions left. There is no class next Sunday, Thanksgiving weekend. So we'll meet again on the first Sunday in December. And then we have 3 Sundays in December leading up to Christmas. So we have a limited amount of time, limited number of sessions to get through everything. The other reason I'm going to try to go a little bit faster is because this stuff gets repetitive, right? You're probably already thinking, oh, geez, Job's going to say the same thing he did the last time and the time before. And so I'm going to try to skip some verses rather than reading the whole thing. Just as a reminder, I'm using 2 expert witnesses here for this series of classes. Marvin H. Pope, professor of Northwest Semitic languages at Yale, wrote a book called Job, A New Translation with Introduction and Commentary. And Edward L. Greenstein, professor emeritus of the Bible at Bar-Ilan University in Israel, wrote a book, Job, A New Translation. So I'm using those books. I'm intending to, I'm sort of discovering that I favor Greenstein's book only for editorial reasons. Marvin Pope's book has all of the footnotes for each chapter at the end of the chapter. So I'm always flipping back and forth, right? Greenstein's book, the footnotes for each page are at the bottom of that page, right? So it's easy, it's much easier to read. So I'm finding myself favoring Greenstein's book as I go through this. Anything anybody wants to bring up from last time, previous sessions? Then we'll get started with chapter 16. I do want to read a couple of verses at the beginning of the chapter. Then Job answered, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. I like that translation. According to Greenstein, the Hebrew does have a sense of suffering and misery in that verse. So you're trying to comfort me, but you're making things worse. You're making my misery worse, he says. Have windy words no limit? Or what provokes you that you keep on talking? Then he says, I also could talk as you do. If our places were switched, I could talk as you do too. And then in Job's view, he's a victim of divine violence. He says, surely now God has, this is verse 7, surely now God has worn me out. He has made desolate all my company. And then later, verse 11, God gives me up to the ungodly and casts me into the hands of the wicked. I was at ease and he broke me in 2. He seized me by the neck and dashed me to pieces. Those are violent words. Slashes open my kidneys, shows no mercy, and he pours out my gall on the ground. Verse 15, I have sewed sackcloth upon my skin and have laid my strength in the dust. Literally, the Hebrew laid my horn in the dust. An animal's horns were a symbol of strength. And when an animal died and went down, the horns went into the ground. That's what that's the metaphor he's using here. Have laid my horn in the dust. Verse 18, O earth, do not cover my blood. Let my outcry find no resting place. The image there reminds me of the story of Cain and Abel, when after Cain said, am I my brother's keeper? And God said to Cain, what have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the earth. blood is a testimony to a violent crime. And that's what Job is saying here. In verse 17, in chapter 17, verse 3, Job begins to talk to God directly. Verse 3 says, "Lay down a pledge for me with yourself. Who is there that will give surety for me? Since you have closed their minds to understanding, therefore you will not let them triumph." Verse 5 is a bit of a translation problem. "Those who denounce friends for reward, the eyes of their children will fail." Greenstein has this: "Those who invite friends for a meal, while the eyes of their children fail from starvation." A little bit different point of view there. Starting chapter 17, verse 10, now Job switches back to talk to his friends again. "But you come back now, all of you, though I shall not find a sensible person among you," he's saying. But he wants them to come back anyway.
Steve, question.
Yeah.
I thought in Hebrews they couldn't talk directly to God. I mean, you couldn't even write God out, right? Yahweh.
You weren't supposed to say the name of God.
Okay.
You could certainly talk to God.
But you couldn't.
Remember when Abraham bargained with God, right? Well,
Okay.
if there were 40 righteous people, will you destroy Sodom and so forth? So you can certainly talk to God.
But you can't write it.
You can't write the name of God.
Okay, thank you.
Verse 12, "They make night into day." They must mean the wicked people. "They make night into day. The light, they say, is near to the darkness. If I look for Sheol as my house,"
Totally different translation.
literally measure Sheol for my house. "If I spread my couch in darkness, if I say to the pit, you are my father, and to the worm, my mother or my sister, where then is my hope? Who will see my hope?" There's a little bit of a play on words here. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about a weaver, and I mentioned that hope and thread, or hope and cord, is the same thing, right? In Hebrew, if you're hanging by a thread, you're hanging by a hope. Here he's measuring with a cord, and then he talks about hope in verse 15. So that's a little bit of a play on words. Verse 16, chapter 17, verse 16 is a bit of a translation problem. "Will it go down to the bars of Sheol?" He's talking about his hope again. "Will it go down to Sheol? Shall we descend together into the dust?" That's probably not correct. He is not asking his friends to die with him. It probably, remember, he's talking about hope here. So will it go down to the bars of Sheol, descending altogether into the dust? In other words, hope descends entirely into the dust. Now Bildad answered. Chapter 18. "Then Bildad the Shuhite answered, How long will you hunt for words? Consider, and then we shall speak. Why are we counted as cattle? Why are we stupid in your sight? You who tear yourself in your anger, shall the earth be forsaken because you tear yourself?" He's using a metaphor of a wild animal tearing up prey. But he's saying, listen, you're tearing yourself up here because of your anger. Bildad, of course, agrees with Eliphaz and Zophar that the wicked are always punished by God and the righteous are always rewarded. So that's the way things are. That's the way God's justice works. So in verse 5, he says, "Surely the light of the wicked is put out, and the flame of their fire does not shine." Let me skip down to verse 13 in the interest of saving some time. By disease, their skin is consumed. Still talking about the wicked here. The firstborn of death consumes their limbs. What does that mean? The word death here is actually in Hebrew the name of a Canaanite god, and the Canaanite god of death. And the firstborn of death was a way to refer to a certain terrible disease that was always fatal. This may be similar to the disease, the skin disease that Job has. Maybe that's why Bildad is saying this. They are torn, the firstborn of death consumes their limbs. They are torn from the tent in which they trusted and are brought to the king of terrors. In other words, death himself. In their tents, nothing remains. Sulfur is scattered upon their habitations. Sulfur is often used as an indication of God's judgment. Verse 16, their roots dry up beneath and their branches wither above. This is referring to the lineage, the family tree. Their entire lineage is gone. 17, their memory perishes from the earth. They have no name in the street. Down in verse 20, they of the west are appalled at their fate, and horror seizes those of the east. The use of extremes, west and east, implies everywhere, right? Those everywhere are terrified. Surely such are the dwellings of the ungodly, such is the place of those who do not know God.
Steve?
Yes.
I thought the end of the chapter may be a good place for me to ask my question.
Of course.
Which is, okay, so the three friends, do they speak, overall, I'm sure somebody's measured this, do they all speak about the same amount, or does one of them, is one of them more like the leader and speaks more?
That's an interesting question. There are 3 cycles in which Job, then Eliphaz, then Job, then Bildad, then Job, and then Zophar, right? That's one cycle. There are 3 cycles here. The interesting thing is, in the 3rd cycle, Zophar doesn't have a part in that. And when we get to that place, I'll say a little bit more about why that might be.
And then my second half of that is, I'm paying attention, but it's deeper than me. So do each of them take a different tack in their arguments, or are their arguments all parallel?
They're pretty much parallel, yes.
Yeah, okay.
They use different words, but they all have the same opinion, and that is, Job, you must be guilty. Your punishment from God is evidence of your guilt, right? That's their opinion. As these cycles go on, they get more and more forceful, and Job gets more and more forceful too. We'll see in a little bit. Job comes very close to blasphemy when he accuses God of rewarding the wicked and punishing the righteous. Chapter 19. Now it's Job's turn to talk, responding to Bildad. Then Job answered, "How long will you torment me and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times you have cast reproach upon me. Are you not ashamed to wrong me?" By 10 times, he doesn't mean that literally. He means many times. And even if it is true that I have erred, my error remains with me. Probably better would be, my error will lodge with me. It's going to lodge within me. I will be called to account if that's true. Then he talks about what God has done to him. Know then that God has put me in the wrong, verse 6, and closed his net around me. Even when I cry out violence, I am not answered. I call aloud, but there is no justice. Verse 10, he breaks me down on every side and I am gone. In other words, I am going to die. He has uprooted my hope like a tree. And he's talking about how even his family is gone. You know, his children are dead at this point. Verse 13, he has put family far from me, and my acquaintances are wholly estranged from me. My relatives and close friends have failed me. The guests in my house have forgotten me. My serving girls count me as a stranger. I have become an alien in their eyes. I call to my servant, but he gives me no answer. I must myself plead with him. My breath is repulsive to my wife, and I am loathsome to my own family. Verse 18, even young children despise me. When I rise, they talk against me. Greenstein has, even young hooligans despise me. When I rise, they talk against me. All my intimate friends, verse 19, all my intimate friends abhor me, and those whom I loved have turned against me. My bones cling to my skin and to my flesh. So he says he's nothing but skin and bones at this point. And I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. Were you aware that that phrase, skin of my teeth, comes from the book of Job? In other words, of course, your teeth don't have any skin. So he's saying, I have escaped with nothing. I have nothing left. Have pity on me, O you, my friends, for the hand of God has touched me. Why do you, like God, pursue me, never satisfied with my flesh? There's a saying in that at that time, if you're defaming someone, it was said that you're eating their flesh, right? So he's saying, why do you, like God, pursue me, defaming me, but never being satisfied with what you are doing? Now he wishes that his words were written down. He wants hard copy evidence to present to God. Verse 24, oh, that with an iron pen and with lead they were engraved on a rock forever, is implied here as evidence. 25, for I know that my Redeemer lives. Now, Redeemer, we tend to think of Redeemer in terms of Jesus, right? Jesus Christ. That's not what this means here. He means an advocate. Earlier in the book, he talks about someone that will advocate for him or mediate to God for him. That's what he means here by Redeemer, someone to speak for him to God. For I know that my Redeemer lives and that at last he will stand upon the earth, meaning stand to testify for me upon the earth. Verse 26 needs some explanation. After my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God. Well, if his skin has been destroyed, then how can his flesh, in the flesh I shall see God? What that is, that's an idiom. Then in my flesh, that is with my own eyes, in other words. After my skin has been thus destroyed, then with my own eyes I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side, that is, see for myself. My eyes shall behold and not another. My heart faints within me, meaning I pine for this. I'm longing for this. My heart hurts because I want this so much. Verse 28, if you say, how will we persecute him? Or for what will we persecute him? And the root of the matter is found in him, or the root cause is found in him. So there's something in Job that is the cause of all of this. But Job is saying, if you say those things, be afraid of the sword, for wrath brings the punishment of the sword, so that you may know there is a judgment. So now it's Zophar's turn in this cycle. Zophar the Naamathite answered, pay attention, my thoughts urge me to answer because of the agitation within me. I hear censure that insults me, and a spirit beyond my understanding answers me. Probably better would be, and the spirit by which I understand urges me to answer.
Steve,
Yeah.
there appear to be a lot of translation problems with Job.
Yes, there are. Yeah, that's true. This is a very difficult book to translate. The source material, well, I mean, there are a number of problems translating Hebrew. One is that you have to fill in your own vowels if you're using ancient Hebrew. So depending on what vowels you fill in, it changes the meaning of the words. Ancient Hebrew is more like a shorthand, so that when the cantor was reading from the Hebrew Bible, that shorthand would remind him of what he's supposed to say. But it's very difficult if you don't know the story in the first place, right? If you know the story, well, you can recite it using that shorthand as a guide. But otherwise, it's very difficult. Also, there are a lot of copying mistakes and fragments missing, verses misplaced, and so forth. And then, of course, you needed to know quite a bit about the culture too, at least something. I mean, a simple example is translators always replace nearly always replace the word belly with heart, because back then they thought the seat of the emotions were in the belly. But the mythology in our society is that emotions reside in the heart. So they always replace the word belly with heart. Sometimes you lose the metaphor, though, if you do that. So yeah, it's a problem. The translation is a big problem. Let's see, what do I want to talk about next? Verse 10, there might be a little translation problem there. Chapter 20, verse 10, their children will seek the favor of the poor, and their hands will give back their wealth. Probably better would be their children will be crushed with poverty, and their hands will give back their wealth. Sometimes the word for wealth or treasure can mean one's family for obvious reasons. So children and wealth here is sort of a little bit of parallelism. They're going to lose their wealth, they're going to lose their children to poverty. This next section, starting with verse 12, Zophar is making a metaphor that the wickedness pursue evil as a glutton pursues food, but it's poisonous. It ends up being poisonous. Verse 12, though wickedness is sweet in their mouth, though they hide it under their tongues, though they are loath to let it go and hold it in their mouths, yet their food is turned in their stomachs. It is the venom of asps within them. They swallow down riches and vomit them up again. God casts them out of their bellies. They will suck the poison of asps. The tongue of a viper will kill them. They will not look on rivers. This is probably rivers of oil. They will not look on rivers of oil, streams flowing with honey and curds. They will give back the fruit of their toil and will not swallow it down. From the profit of their trading, they will get no enjoyment, for they have crushed and abandoned the poor. They have seized a house that they did not build. Verse 20, they knew no quiet in their bellies. In their greed, they let nothing escape. There was nothing left after they had eaten. Therefore, their prosperity will not endure. So that's sort of a metaphor of eating poisonous food, wickedness being like eating poisonous food. Now, God's going to fill their bellies. Verse 23, to fill their belly to the full, God will send his fierce anger into them and rain it upon them as their food. That sounds a little bit like manna from heaven, but this is anger from heaven that it's going to fill their bellies. The word for food here, the Hebrew word used there is an unusual word for food. And it looks a lot like the word for warfare. So this is to transition here from talking about food to talking about warfare. So in verse 24, they will flee from an iron weapon. A bronze arrow will strike them through. It is drawn forth and comes out of their body, and the glittering point comes out of their gall, or the flashing blade comes out of their gall. Terrors come upon them. Now in verse 26, we have another verse that may be an example of equating treasures with families or children. 26, utter darkness is laid up for their treasures, maybe their families. A fire fanned by no one will devour them, and what is left in their tent will be consumed, or any survivor in their house will be consumed. So I'm going to skip ahead to chapter 21, unless anybody has some questions. Then Job answered, "Listen carefully to my words and let this be your consolation. Bear with me and I will speak. Then after I have spoken, you can mock on or blather on in some translations. As for me, is my complaint addressed to mortals? Why should I not be impatient? Look at me and be appalled and lay your hand upon my mouth." So he then goes on to talk about the wicked and why they live. Why do the wicked live on, reach old age, and grow mighty in power? Their children are established in their presence and their offspring before their eyes. Their houses are safe from fear, and no rod of God is upon them. Their bull breeds without fail, and their cow calves and never miscarries. They send out their little ones like a flock, or their little ones run rampant like a flock. This is the same kind of reference as the hooligans, referencing children as hooligans earlier. Their little ones run rampant like a flock, and their children dance around. They sing to the tambourine and the lyre and rejoice to the sound of their pipe. So he's complaining about how the wicked are always seem to prosper. One little confusing point here. I don't know if I can clarify it, but I'll point it out so maybe it won't trip you up when you read through it. Verse 14, they say to God, now this is the beginning of a quote, right? "Leave us alone, we do not desire to know your ways. What is the Almighty that we should serve him? And what profit do we get if we pray to him?" In this translation, there's the end of the quote is right there. Some translations continue the quote. They don't end it there. Verse 16 is not their prosperity, indeed their own achievement. If that's part of the quote, it probably is not our prosperity, indeed our own achievement. In other words, we've earned what we've got. God hasn't given it to us, so why should we pay attention to God? And the verse 16 ends, "The plans of the wicked are repugnant to me," or they are far from God's sight. God does not see the plans of the wicked. Let's see, talking about the wicked again, verse 19. "You say God stores up their iniquity for their children. Let it be paid back to them so they may know it." I like to add the words "I say" so that it's a little bit more balanced. "You say God stores up their iniquity for their children. I say, let it be paid back to them so they may know it." 21, "For what do they care for their household after them when the number of their months is cut off?" That means near death. The last year of their lives is cut in half, in other words, so they're very close to death. Will any teach God knowledge, seeing that he judges those that are on high, or that he judges those from on high? Could be. Some verses that compares the wicked with the righteous. Verse 23, one dies in full prosperity, being wholly at ease and secure, his loins full of milk and the marrow of his bones moist. Another dies in bitterness of soul, never having tasted of good. They lie down alike in the dust, and the worms cover them. So guess which is which? Well, he's saying the wicked are die in full prosperity, and the righteous die in bitterness of soul, and their fate is the same for both of them. Let's see, what do I want? Let's skip to verse 34. How then will you comfort me with empty nothings? Literally windy breath. Now we come on to some difficult verses. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're doing good today. I'm glad I'm skipping so many verses. We're doing well for time. Chapter 22. Now it's again Eliphaz's turn to speak. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered, can a mortal be of use to God? Can even the wisest be of service to him? Is it any pleasure to the Almighty if you are righteous, or is it gain to him if you make your ways blameless? Is it for your piety that he reproves you and enters into judgment with you? Now, starting with verse 5, there is, I guess you might call it a parody of the charges that Eliphaz says that God is charging Job with. He goes over the top with these accusations. Verse 5, is not your wickedness great? There is no end to your iniquities. For you have extracted pledges from your family for no reason and stripped the naked of their clothing. Now, there's no indication that Job has done any of that. This is just, Eliphaz is getting very angry at this point that Job doesn't get his point. So he goes over the top in these charges. Verse 7, you have given no water to the weary to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. Verse 8 is a short verse that probably really should be at the beginning of verse 15, which is another short verse. So I'm going to wait to read verse 8 until I get down to verse 15. You have sent the widows away empty-handed, and the arms of the orphans you have crushed. Therefore, snares are around you, and sudden terror overwhelms you. Or darkness, so that you cannot see, a flood of water covers you. This is like the Exodus when the Egyptian army was covered with water. Is not God high in the heavens? See the highest stars, how lofty they are. It probably would be better, is not God high in the heavens at the top of the lofty stars? Therefore you say, what does God know? Can he judge through the deep darkness or through foggy clouds? Thick clouds enwrap him so that he does not see, and he walks on the dome of heaven. So Eliphaz is accusing Job of saying, God doesn't really know anything. God doesn't see anything. Well, Job doesn't believe that. This is again a case of Eliphaz being over the top with his accusations. Now we'll make verse 8 part of verse 15. The powerful possess the land, and the favored live in it, or those they favor live in it. Will you keep to the old way that the wicked have trod? Will you keep to the depraved way the wicked have trod? They were snatched away from before their time. Their foundation was washed away by a flood. Now Eliphaz starts to mock Job. Verse 17, they said to God, leave us alone. And what can the Almighty do to us? Yet he filled their houses with good things, but the plans of the wicked are repugnant to me, or are far from God. Job actually did say those things, but Eliphaz is repeating them as a mockery of what Job has said. Jumping ahead, Eliphaz is now going to give some advice in verse 21. Agree with God and be at peace. In this way, good will come to you. Receive instruction from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be restored. If you remove unrighteousness from your tents, if you treat gold like dust and gold of Ophir like the stones of the torrent bed. That's kind of obscure. This is a little bit of wordplay here. The Hebrew word for gold is similar to the Hebrew word like the stone. And the word for dust is similar to Ophir. So it's this verse maybe here more for the sake of wordplay than for meaning. But basically it's like saying, don't put your trust in riches. And if the Almighty is your gold and your precious silver, then you will delight yourself in the Almighty and lift up your face to God. Verse 29, when others are humiliated, you say it is pride, for he saves the humble. An alternate translation is, God brings low the proud, for he saves the humble. He will deliver even those who are guilty. Now, this is a pretty obvious corruption. Eliphaz is not saying he will, that's more of what Job is saying, right? The guilty, he will deliver even the guilty. The Hebrew word that is translated here, guilty, is actually uninnocent. It's the very awkward construction, uninnocent. And Greenstein says that un probably doesn't belong there. He has it, Greenstein's translation for verse 30 is, since he delivers the innocent, you will escape because of the cleanness of your hands, right? If you have clean hands, you are innocent and God will deliver you as he does with all of the innocent. Okay, let's see, we're up to 23. Let's proceed. Chapter 23, then Job answered, today also my complaint is bitter. It's bitter again. His hand is heavy despite my groaning. His means God, God's hand. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, and I might come even to his dwelling. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. He said, maybe I would have had better luck if I went to where God lives. But he can't do that. In verse 8, if I go forward, he is not there, or backward, I cannot perceive him. On the left, he hides, and I cannot behold him. I turn to the right, but I cannot see him. Those direction words, forward, back, left, and right. In Hebrew, that's the same as the directions east, west, north, and south. If you're facing east, forward is east, backward is west, left is north, and right is south, right? So that's what he's saying. I've looked everywhere. I can't find God. Verse 10, but he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come out like gold. My foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and have not turned aside. So Job claims, listen, I've always followed God. I don't deserve what I'm getting here. But he said it wouldn't do any good anyway. But he's verse 13, but he stands alone, and who can dissuade him? What he desires, he does. For he will complete what he appoints for me. And many such things are in his mind. So there's no way I can stop God from doing what he's doing. And I think God has even more things in mind for me. Chapter 24, how are we doing for time? We're just about out of time. I think chapter 24 has several things I want to comment on, including some verses that are either out of place or I'm going to wait until next week to talk about chapter 24, if that's okay. So any comments on what we've gone, where we've come so far?
When was Job written again?
Probably during, yeah, it's a complicated question. The prologue and the epilogue may have roots in ancient literature, Mesopotamian literature, or even Egyptian literature. The question of why do bad things happen to good people has been around since the beginning of time. And so the prologue and epilogue, which are in prose, may have been taken from some very early writings. The poetry part of it, the section we're in now, the huge section we're in now, that probably was put together sometime during the Persian period of the Jews, which started when King Cyrus of Persia released the Jews from the Babylonian exile. The Persians controlled their homeland, but Jews were allowed to go home in 538 BCE. And the Persian period lasted roughly 200 years until the Persians were conquered by Alexander the Great. So we're talking about, roughly last part of the 6th century to the last part of the 4th century, thereabouts. Can't get it any closer than that. Anything else? Peggy. Oh, you're muted, Peggy.
Yeah. The universality of the why bad things happen to good people, it seems sort of wonderful that there's this continuity of people always trying to struggle with that, and that we can look at it as ancient literature, as almost a Sholem Aleichem story if you wanted to, and then at the same time something that's very current and really appropriate for so close to Thanksgiving. Really, I mean.
Yeah, especially the kind of Thanksgiving we're probably all going to have this year.
This year, yeah, this year. It's this thing seems to have just, for me, layers after layers after layers of that you could put on it.
Yeah.
You could look at it from a 2020 point of view. You could look at it from a 3rd century point of view. Just everyday chicken soup for the soul point of view. I mean, it's just amazing to me that I think that's what keeps it alive, is because there is such a universal message in there.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. I think that's good to have. Some things don't seem to translate into everyday life as much as this does, but this really does. Yeah.
Janet, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I was interested in the quotation, "I know that my Redeemer lives."
Yeah.
With the words in that exact order makes me think of the singing that I often hear exactly at Advent. And there are other things that we've come across that you haven't necessarily stopped to point out that get co-opted by Christianity. and applied to Jesus. That would be another entire lesson on which parts of Job get plucked up by the Christians and used to point to Jesus.
Yes. Yes. And in their tradition, a redeemer was someone who bought someone out of slavery, paid money to free someone from slavery, right? And that's what we use. That's what we apply to Jesus as Christians.
It's interesting in the translation I have, they have capitalized Redeemer with a
Yes.
capital R. So, I mean, it does seem like Jesus when I read it. So
That's really very bold of them to do that. That's shows a bias, quite a bias.
But it's also a really good reminder that in order to understand the New Testament, we have to understand the Old Testament. Because the people of the New Testament knew the Hebrew scriptures. And so if we're really going to get what Jesus was saying, we have to understand what they had been learning being good and faithful Jews. So
and you guys may already know this, but in the seminaries these days, we don't even say New Testament and Old Testament. Now in the seminaries, we say the Hebrew scripture and the Greek scripture in order to be sensitive to the fact that we are no longer trying to give the message that the Jewish people missed the boat.
Yeah.
And that their scriptures are old.
Yeah, I think that's very good. Is that there are Christians who think that, well, we're New Testament people, right? The Old Testament, there's that old worn out Testament, and then there's this new and improved Testament, right? So, but that's not right at all.
What about if God can have an assessor? Why not Job have a redeemer? I mean, it sounds like defense attorney and prosecutor.
Yes. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, there's a note in my study Bible that says you could translate redeemer here as vindicator.
There you go.
Yeah.
And, when they're writing these things, it would be like me writing a poem today and saying, my personal shopper who gets my groceries because of COVID did something or other. And it would just be a reference to somebody who does something for you in our culture that you would get because you're in my culture with me at this time. And we're trying to figure out what it means a whole lot later with sometimes not a lot of clues.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think it would not be very sweet to hear the song, I Know That My Vindicator Lives.
that doesn't scan very well, does it?
No, but Jesus would make a great defense attorney.
How about Jesus as our shopper that keeps us safe from COVID?
There you go.
Yeah. Well, we are just about out of time here. We're probably going to get kicked off in a minute back to the big room. So thank you all for showing up here. And remember, no class next week.